Imagine owning some of the most advanced nuclear power stations in the world, producing electricity for millions of homes, yet still running out of money. Most businesses fail because customers disappear. British Energy had customers. Its nuclear reactors continued generating electricity every day. Demand for electricity never stopped. The problem was something almost nobody expected. Electricity became too cheap. At its peak, British Energy generated around 1/5 of the United Kingdom's electricity. It owned most of Britain's modern nuclear power stations. Its reactors supplied reliable baseload power, operating day and night, regardless of wind, rain, or sunshine. To many investors, it looked like one of the safest utility businesses imaginable. Electricity is essential. People cannot simply stop using it. Revenue appeared almost guaranteed. After being privatized in 1996, British Energy became one of the largest listed electricity generators in Britain. Investors believed nuclear power would produce stable profits for decades. But hidden beneath that seemingly predictable business was a financial model unlike almost every other power company. Building a nuclear power station costs billions of pounds. Operating it requires thousands of highly trained engineers, strict safety regulation, continuous maintenance, fuel management, and enormous long-term decommissioning obligations extending decades into the future. Most of those costs remain almost unchanged whether electricity prices are high or low. That made British Energy unusually dependent upon one variable, the wholesale price of electricity. As long as electricity prices remained comfortably above its operating costs, the business generated healthy cash flow. But if market prices ever fell significantly, the reactors couldn't simply stop and restart like ordinary factories. The costs would continue, even if profits disappeared. Few investors considered that possibility, because throughout the 1990s, most analysts believed electricity prices would remain relatively stable. British Energy's management believed it too, but within only a few years, a series of market changes would drive electricity prices sharply lower, transforming one of Britain's safest-looking companies into one of its largest corporate rescues, not because the reactors failed, but because the economics behind them did.
To understand why British Energy collapsed, you first need to understand how electricity is actually sold. British Energy didn't decide the price of electricity. The market did. Imagine a supermarket. Every morning, multiple farmers arrive with fresh produce. The supermarket buys from whoever can supply the required quantity at the lowest available price. Electricity works in a remarkably similar way. Every day, power generators submit offers into the wholesale electricity market. Gas-fired stations, coal plants, hydroelectric dams, wind farms, nuclear reactors. The national grid purchases enough electricity to meet demand, while the market determines the price. British Energy couldn't simply charge customers more because operating a nuclear reactor was expensive. It had to accept whatever wholesale price the market produced. That distinction became critically important. Because nuclear power stations have unusually low fuel costs, but exceptionally high fixed costs. Whether electricity prices are high or low, the reactors still require licensed operators, constant maintenance, strict safety inspections, nuclear fuel management, insurance, security, and long-term waste handling. Imagine owning an enormous luxury hotel. Even if fewer guests arrive, you still need reception staff, security, maintenance, electricity, cleaning, and management. Many of your largest expenses barely change. British Energy operated under the same principle. Its reactors continued producing electricity almost continuously, But profitability depended entirely upon the price received for every megawatt-hour sold. As long as wholesale prices remained comfortably above operating costs, the business generated strong cash flow. If prices fell, the reactors would continue generating exactly the same electricity, while profit rapidly disappeared. This wasn't a technology problem, it was a pricing problem, and British Energy had almost no control over it. The company had built its future around one assumption: that wholesale electricity prices would remain high enough to support one of the most expensive operating models in the entire energy industry. For several years, British Energy's assumptions appeared correct. Electricity prices remained relatively healthy. Its reactors generated reliable cash flow. Then the market began changing. Not because people stopped using electricity. Demand remained strong. Supply increased. During the late 1990s, the United Kingdom's electricity industry became increasingly competitive. Following market deregulation, new generators entered the market. Highly efficient gas-fired power stations were built across the country. Known as combined cycle gas turbine plants, or CCGTs, these new stations transformed Britain's electricity system. Compared with older coal plants, they were faster to build, cheaper to operate, and far more efficient. Natural gas prices were also relatively low. As more gas-fired stations entered service, they supplied enormous amounts of electricity into the wholesale market. Competition intensified. Then another change occurred. Electricity demand wasn't growing nearly as quickly as many forecasts had predicted. The market suddenly had more generating capacity than it immediately needed. Imagine opening 10 new supermarkets in a town that only needs 7. Every supermarket must compete harder for the same customers. Prices inevitably fall. Exactly the same thing happened inside Britain's electricity market. More generators competed to sell electricity, but consumers weren't using enough additional electricity to absorb the new supply. Wholesale prices steadily declined. For most power companies, falling prices reduced profits. For British Energy, they threatened survival. Its reactors continued producing electricity 24 hours a day. Its maintenance costs remained enormous. Its staffing levels changed very little. Its long-term nuclear obligations didn't disappear. Only one thing changed: the market price paid for every megawatt hour. British Energy wasn't generating less electricity. It was simply earning less money for producing exactly the same product. The company's entire financial model had quietly begun working against itself. As electricity prices continued falling, British Energy faced a problem unlike almost any other power company. Its reactors couldn't simply reduce production to cut costs. Most manufacturing businesses can slow production when prices fall. Factories reduce shifts. Retailers order less inventory. Construction companies delay new projects. Nuclear power doesn't work that way. A nuclear reactor is designed to operate continuously. Stopping and restarting reactors is a complex, expensive, and highly regulated process. Even if a reactor generated less revenue, many of its largest costs continued almost unchanged. Engineers still had to monitor every system. Safety inspections still had to be completed. Security remained in place around the clock. Fuel management continued. Spent nuclear fuel still required long-term storage, and every reactor carried future decommissioning obligations that would cost billions of pounds decades later. Imagine owning a commercial aircraft. Whether it flies 100 passengers or only 20, you still need pilots, engineers, maintenance, insurance, airport fees, and regulatory inspections. Many costs barely change. British Energy operated under exactly the same economic principle. Its revenue moved with the electricity market. Its costs barely moved at all. As wholesale prices continued falling, cash flow began disappearing. At first, management believed prices would eventually recover. Instead, the market remained weak. Every megawatt-hour sold generated less income than before. Yet the reactors continued producing electricity every hour of every day. The business found itself trapped. Generating more electricity no longer solved the problem. It simply sold more electricity at increasingly unprofitable prices. The company had become extraordinarily efficient at producing something the market no longer paid enough for. British Energy wasn't suffering from operational failure. Its nuclear stations were performing exactly as designed. The financial model around them was no longer working. The reactors had become prisoners of the electricity market itself. By 2002, British Energy was no longer hoping for higher electricity prices. It was fighting to survive the next few weeks. The company still generated enormous amounts of electricity. Its reactors continued operating safely. But every day, cash flowed out faster than it flowed in. Management urgently searched for ways to stabilize the business. Costs were reduced wherever possible. Investment plans were delayed. Assets were reviewed. But unlike many companies, British Energy couldn't simply sell its nuclear power stations. Potential buyers faced the same electricity market. The reactors were technically valuable. Financially, they had become extremely difficult to justify. Banks also became increasingly cautious. The company carried significant financial obligations, while future cash flow depended entirely upon electricity prices recovering. No one could guarantee when or even if that would happen. Investors lost confidence. The share price collapsed. Raising fresh capital became almost impossible. British Energy entered a dangerous financial spiral. Lower electricity prices reduced cash flow. Lower cash flow weakened confidence. Weaker confidence restricted financing. Restricted financing increased liquidity pressure. Every month, the balance sheet became more fragile. Then management reached an unavoidable conclusion. Without external support, the company would eventually be unable to meet its financial obligations. This wasn't simply another corporate restructuring. British Energy supplied around 20% of Britain's electricity. Allowing the company to collapse suddenly could threaten the stability of the country's electricity system. The crisis was no longer only about shareholders. It had become a matter of national energy security. The government now faced a difficult decision: protect taxpayers or protect Britain's electricity supply. One of the largest corporate rescue decisions in modern British history was about to begin. British Energy could no longer survive on its own. In September 2002, the British government stepped in. Not because the company was profitable, not because shareholders needed protecting, but because Britain's electricity system could not afford an uncontrolled collapse. If British Energy suddenly stopped operating, around 20% of the country's electricity generation would immediately be placed at risk. The government announced an emergency financial support package, giving the company enough liquidity to continue operating while a long-term solution was developed. The rescue immediately became controversial. Critics argued taxpayers were bailing out a private company that had made poor commercial decisions. Supporters argued the alternative could have threatened Britain's energy security,
damaged confidence in the electricity market, and created significant economic disruption. The rescue wasn't simply about keeping the lights on tomorrow. It was about preventing panic throughout the entire electricity industry. Over the following months, government officials, banks, creditors, bondholders, and company management negotiated one of the most complicated financial restructurings in British corporate history. Debt was restructured, ownership changed, future nuclear liabilities were renegotiated. Shareholders suffered devastating losses. Many investors who had purchased British Energy during privatization saw almost all of their investment disappear. But the reactors continued operating. Electricity continued flowing into the national grid. Customers noticed almost nothing. Operationally, the company remained remarkably successful. Financially, the original British Energy had effectively ended. The rescue demonstrated something few people had previously considered. Some companies become so important that governments are forced to rescue the system rather than the business itself. British Energy survived. Its shareholders largely did not.
British Energy survived, but it never truly returned to the company investors had originally purchased. The restructuring fundamentally changed its future. Government support stabilized operations. Debt was reduced. The immediate liquidity crisis ended, but shareholders paid an enormous price. Most of the company's value had already disappeared. The rescue protected Britain's electricity supply, not investor returns. In 2005, British Energy gradually returned to financial stability as wholesale electricity prices improved. Ironically, the business itself had never been the fundamental problem. Its reactors remained among Britain's most reliable sources of electricity. They continued producing low-carbon baseload power every day. The problem had always been timing. The company had built a cost structure designed for higher electricity prices, just as market competition permanently pushed prices lower. Eventually, the economics improved again, but by then the original investment story had already collapsed. In 2009, French energy giant EDF acquired British Energy for approximately £12.5 billion. Its nuclear stations became part of one of the world's largest electricity companies. The reactors continued generating electricity, only the ownership changed. British Energy's collapse became one of the clearest examples of an uncomfortable business reality. A company can operate almost perfectly, produce an essential product, retain millions of customers, and still fail financially. Because businesses don't survive by producing valuable products alone. They survive by generating sustainable cash flow. British Energy wasn't defeated by engineering failure. Its reactors performed exactly as designed. It wasn't defeated by declining demand. Britain still needed every unit of electricity it produced. And it wasn't defeated by obsolete technology. Nuclear power remains one of the country's most important energy sources today. It was defeated because its financial model depended upon electricity prices that the market was no longer willing to pay. The reactors never stopped working, only the economics behind them did. British Energy proved that even companies powering an entire nation cannot survive when the market no longer rewards what they produce.